Good morning, Jeff. We're
Good morning.
off to trauma lens paradigm shift. So that's a topic that many of our parents and professionals struggle with. And let's help the audience understand what it is and how we get there and why we need to get there. So first, help our audience understand what is a trauma lens paradigm shift.
Well, we all view the world through, what we're calling a paradigms. Things that we were taught, the way we were taught to look at the world, the way we were taught to experience it and interact with it. Very often, the reason we start with a paradigm shift in our program is we want people to look away from what was traditionally taught was a behavioral paradigm, where you tended to view children and through the lens of what they're doing and what they're not doing. What we encourage is that we look a little deeper and we try to look at what the motivations for what they are doing or not doing are, and where they came from and how we can begin to change them.
So, how many times I've heard parents say, I think my child's motivation for this behavior is to drive me crazy.
Well, that's a good example. That's an example of applying our old paradigm. We look at the behaviors and we look at the situations that go into it, and we say, well, the only reason I can figure out why they would still be doing this is if they're trying to drive me crazy. But of course, with the new paradigm shift, there is another reason, and in fact, a more accurate reason than that one.
So when you say there is a reason for these drive me crazy behaviors, what are you talking about?
Well, basically what we teach is that underneath all of these behaviors is, for our traumatized children, a negative internal working model. In other words, what they were taught very early in life is that they're bad, the world is bad, and the primary caregivers are bad. With that internal paradigm, once they know that, once that becomes part of their knowledge, then that impacts how they make all of their decisions after that.
So you just use the word knowledge, how that becomes part of their knowledge. Like, what are you talking about? Like somebody set them down and said, you're a bad kid, which I honestly, I've seen it happen before. But is that what you're saying, that someone set this kid down and said, you're bad and I just can't be trusted?
It can happen that way.
Uh-huh.
And we both know examples where kids were straight up told they were idiots or bad or stupid. But more often, the way it happens is the nonverbal interactions with the child or the pre-verbal interactions with the child. When a child feels fear, and that fear goes to the parent, transfers to the parent, because that's what we do. We share our children's emotions, and they can't handle that. The parent's limbic brain will usually try to distance themselves from that fear. When that happens, they're usually going to send some sort of what we call "you suck" messages to the child. Basically tell them, stop triggering me. You should stop triggering me. When in fact, what we really want to do when we have kids, what we really want to do is not say, stop triggering me. We want to say, how can I help you?
So in this paradigm shift, where what I think of it as is reformatting my brain. I have to go back and say, just because my parents did this, and I even parented different with my birth kids than when I did foster care and things. So I have to go back and reformat my brain, and I'm going to use, I think, your words, see this child differently.
I love that concept of reformat, because that's what the paradigms are. They're formats. They're formats that lay in the back, and a lot of times they come from how we were parented.
I always liked Covey's. He uses the term mental map. It's like, I have this big mind map in my brain, and it's like all these lines. And so when it comes to behavior for a birth kid, the lines go this way, but for a child in foster care or adopted kid, the lines go this way. So there's different maps in my head.
And then there's the people who were parented in such a way that they're now going through life going, well, I'm not going to do it that way. That's kind of an anti-paradigm. They have in their brain, they have ways that they don't want to do it, but that's not nearly as effective, because Well, the classic example is the gray horse. Don't think of a gray horse. Whatever you do, don't think of a gray horse. I don't want you thinking of a gray horse now. Never, ever again think of a gray horse. Stop it. And the idea is that the more you try not to think about something, the more you force your brain to think about it.
So what helps with that shift? We may be saying, this isn't working, or I don't want to do it this way.
Well, the first one there is the big one.
What's that?
What I'm doing is not working. I'm not sure I've ever run across anyone that was able to intentionally change their paradigm if their old one was working for them.
That's true.
And what we find with adults, who are trying to raise traumatized children, is that what they're finding is their old paradigm doesn't work. No matter how much they try to consequence or reward or, encourage or discourage, what ends up happening is the child just continues with the behaviors that are considered problematic.
And I think, I'm going back to our old family-based days of when we walked into families with that going on, the parent was still firmly cemented in their parenting and defining the child as bad.
Well, and that's why we developed this material, because you can't get out. It's very, very hard. I don't even know if it's possible to get out of an old paradigm if you don't have a new paradigm to get into.
Something to go to. Yeah.
So that's why we developed this paradigm shift, and what we're encouraging people to see is, how the child was hurt, where the child is hurt, how that hurt is impacting their emotions, and of course, how to make changes, real changes that are going to help the child grow and create paradigms for themselves that actually work.
I think what helped me, and I got to that place of this isn't working, that I started looking for answers. That drove me into places that I didn't even know existed, and research and training and all of these things that
I think that step's almost necessary. I remember back in the early days we did some trainings for pre-adoptive families, and I remember that look on their face as if, I got this. I don't need any of this.
Oh yes. I remember sitting down with one parent and I'm saying, I just went through your child's evaluation and they got 50 some odd behaviors, and they're like, we've got this, they're not that big. It was like, whoa.
Well, that's because that old paradigm is resting in the back of their head saying, my old paradigm works, I know how to change this.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, again, the behavioral paradigm, looking at things just from the behavioral point of view, it can get us in a lot of trouble when we're trying to heal early trauma.
Yeah. So before I want to go off into talking about, the families that go into structure and all that, but I need to calm that down right now and think about how can our families work with what we've just given them. What's the takeaway message? What do we want them to get from this short video?
Well, I want to go so far. The goal of the paradigm shift is to be able, in as many circumstances as possible, and of course we start off with a few, and then we begin to expand until we can see them everywhere. We want to be able to see our children in terms of good kids who were hurt very young, and whose hurt part is now causing them to feel a lot of fear, and that fear, that limbic brain attempt to get away from that fear, is actually the thing that's causing all of the problematic behaviors.
That's a really big one. For me, back in the old days, I would have to sit and chew on that an awful lot, and to have a lot of support to stay there.
But of course, the reason this is so important is because the opposite of that is the old paradigm, which is you are what you do. So if your children has an acceptable amount of bad behavior, then it's very hard in the old paradigm to not look at them and go, you're a bad kid.
Oh yeah.
And yet once you as the adult view that child through that paradigm and say you're a bad kid, the problem with that is the child internalizes that for themselves, because we are the source of their internal pictures of themselves.
Yeah.
So the new paradigm, you're actually a good kid with a hurt part that wasn't your fault, that you need to heal. That gives them something to work on.
Yeah, I mean, if they could even align together, parent and child aligning together.
Yeah, you can both get behind that effort.
Yeah, lots to think about. So Well, thank you all.